We've been trying to deal with the parable of the wheat and the tares in the context of the whole flow of what is taking place out of chapter 12, all taking place on the Sabbath day. And this is the close of that humongous day of controversy and conflict that Jesus was experiencing with the Pharisees. And he has broken into speaking in parables. According to Matthew's gospel, he hadn't done this before, so this was a brand new approach in preaching, so much so that the disciples have come, obviously in verse 10 of chapter 13, and said, "Hey, why are you doing this? What's caused this change?" And Jesus gives explanation to that, and then moves into the parables of the kingdom. And we've contrasted the first parable, which was the parable of the sower, now with these other parables, which are all parables of the kingdom. And the reason we know that is the way he starts the parables. In the first parable, he simply said, "Behold, a sower went out to sow." Now he's literally addressing the kingdom, saying the kingdom of heaven is like. So this is the second parable then, and it's the parable of the wheat and the tares, which begins in verse 24. "Another parable he put forth to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. And while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares?" Now, if you go with me to verse 36, "Then Jesus sent the multitudes away and went into the house. His disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said to them, He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seeds are the sons of the kingdom, and the tares are the sons of the wicked one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels." Let's bow in prayer. What are you trying to tell us, Lord? And how does that speak to us in our particular setting, in our culture, in our moment, in our crisis, in our scene? What are you wanting to reveal to us? We are open to that. And we want to be the kingdom, you in us. And we come to you in helplessness, saying, Teach us your word tonight, for we're open to you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. We've been working on an outline, and for about 3 sessions we've been going through this parable. And the first idea that I presented to you was the idea of initiation. And I don't know why I can't get off of that, and I don't know that I will ever, in my own heart and mind, ever get off of that, because it is such a key to everything that's going on in Christianity in relationship to your life. And it's the fact that in the parables, and you see this consistently, not only in the parables, but in the whole gospel message, that God always takes the initiative. That we didn't start this, you didn't go after him, you didn't initiate this, you didn't get so good that he had to pay attention to you, you didn't fast so many meals that he finally said, okay, I'll try to do something now. You didn't beg and pray, you didn't come to a dozen altars, you didn't work hard, you didn't serve the church, you didn't do anything. God, out of his own divine love for your life, has moved out and has been after your life. In fact, this is so strong in the parables itself that he is not even addressed as God. He is addressed as the sower. In other words, God doesn't even give his own name and say, hey, I'm the one who's after you. He bespeaks about himself. He speaks about himself as the function and the drive of his heart. And I think that's really significant, people. He calls himself the sower. which tells you what he's about, which tells you the one function of his life, which tells you the one desire he has, which tells you the drive of his inner passion for you, that he desperately, desperately wants you, and that he is driven by this inward compulsion to have you, and his very nature is the nature of one who cannot give up on you, who is driven to somehow, some way, plant the seed of righteousness in the depth of your heart. This is what he is all about. And if you want to say, well, you've said that before, can you say it too often, folks? Because somehow, in the bombardment of our world and in the pressures that we begin to experience, we get the feeling that we're all alone and that no one really cares or wants us. And I'm telling you, there is a divine God. How can I convince you? There is a divine God who is driven by this inward compulsion, and he is desperate to complete the function in your life of planting the seed. Now, the interesting thing in the parables is the fact that he is the sower, he is also the seed. And that is a kingdom idea. And that is true with every analogy. And it just absolutely excites me. That is true with every analogy that he offers to us about the kingdom. That he has come to plant the seed, but what is he planting? Himself. Because he wants to get in you and merge with you in the helplessness of your being. And in that merger, life begins to prosper because he is the source of the plant. So he is the seed itself. So what he's really wanting to reveal to you, what he's really wanting to give to you, is none other than himself. And I've struggled with this. How do you communicate? And you cannot communicate this to anyone who has not experienced it. Because Jesus is the truth. See, this runs true with every analogy. Jesus is the truth. He doesn't tell you truth. He is the truth. So if I'm going to tell you truth, I'm going to tell you Jesus. How are you going to tell a person? You can give data about the person. You can give information about the person. You can lay out facts about the person. But how am I really going to tell you Jesus? See, this is not a service to communicate about Jesus to you so you'll know more facts about Jesus than you knew when you came in. Somehow, what's to happen here in this service and every service is that there would be a communication of him. And when he communicates himself to you, somehow you begin to know what you can't know otherwise. See, we can argue, we can debate, we can lay out ideas, we can give concepts, we can give philosophy, we can lay out theology, but in the final analysis, folks, we haven't communicated anything to you but facts, unless God himself comes and plants himself in you, and in planting himself in you, revelation comes and you see the truth, which is Jesus. Woo! We've got an awesome gospel, don't we? Just awesome. Just absolutely awesome. So that's the whole concept of this. He's initiated this. He's brought this into being. So he is after you. And I'm telling you, there is an almighty God who is after you. Now, the second idea that we proposed, actually last week, said it so poorly, got to say it again. It was the idea of instrument. There is an instrument by which God is going to sow the seed in your life. And Jesus is very plain about that, who the sower is. He says, he who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. And we described to you Son of Man on the one hand, Son of God on the other hand. Son of God obviously focuses on his divinity. Son of Man obviously focuses on his humanity. We discovered that 26 times in the Gospels the Son of God title is used, but Jesus never uses that for himself. We discovered 83 times the Son of Man statement title is used, and we discovered that 79 of those 83 times, or was it 82? 82 times, 79 of those 82 times, Jesus is the one who is using the phrase Son of Man. Never calls himself Son of God, always calls himself Son of Man, and he used it as a pronoun. So instead of saying, I'm going downtown, he'd say, Son of Man's going downtown. And he used it as a pronoun, referring to himself. So obviously you'd say, Jesus' favorite expression and description of who he is this Son of Man idea. Now, we all God, and this is important to us. Jesus is God. We don't budge on that. We don't give that up. We won't waver on that. We'll shed blood on that. Step outside. We'll fight for that, brother. We're not going to give up on that. Jesus is God, and we want you to know he's always God. Every time you see him, anytime you see him, everywhere you see him. When you see him as a babe in a manger, he's God. When he's dying on a cross, he's God. When he's walking on the water, he's God. Jesus is consistently, never ever ceased to be, gave up, walked away from, never was anything but God. Jesus is God. So he never gave that up. But you and I know that he gave up what he had as God. Which is absolutely mind-boggling. Wrap your brain around it. Let it be revealed in your heart. Jesus gave up every advantage he had over you and became a helpless babe in a woman's womb. And in that helplessness became filled with the Spirit, and the kingdom was formed. And he says, the one who's doing the sowing is not God, although technically it is. But his emphasis is the one who's doing the sowing is not God on his own, sprinkling down the seed from heaven, giving the gospel message from the sky. That's not what's going on. What's going on is God leaped off his throne, took on the flesh of man, became a helpless babe, was filled with the Spirit, and the one who's the sower of the seed is a helpless man who's filled with the Spirit. Now, when you get a hold of that in the parable, immediately you begin to say, wait a minute, that's who I am. I'm a helpless man filled with the Spirit. So I'm the sower. As Jesus was the sower, you are the sower. In other words, the instrument that God is going to use to sow seed in this community is going to be a helpless man who's filled with God. And that outside of that, seed is not going to be planted and the gospel is not going to be spread, and that God is absolutely depending upon helpless people who are filled with the Spirit to do what needs to be done in his world. Now, we know that the helpless man isn't doing it because he is being sourced by the Spirit. We got that. So ultimately, God is the one who's doing this. Yes, but he's doing it through the instrument of the helpless man. Now, that literally blows all my excuses. Because I can't say I can't. Well, that's the key to being this. See, the guy who says I can is not the guy we want. The guy we want is the guy who says I can't. Because if you can't, then hey, you're wide open to him coming and doing what you can't do in the helplessness. See, if you've got plenty of talent and you're good looking and you got lots of money too, and you just, hey, you've got education and you're just, whoa, we'll just stand back and watch you go, son, and have a big time. But you're not planting the seed. The seed is planted by the helpless guy who can't possibly pull this off, who is filled with the Spirit. And he's calling himself the Son of Man is the sower, he says. Now, the early church had this concept. They just reeked with this concept. We've lost this concept, but they seem to naturally have it in the fullness of the Spirit. See, they knew that everybody, everywhere, every Christian was a down-to-it, all-out, 100%, full-time, called of God minister. See, they didn't recognize clergy and laity. See, I'm clergy. professional. Your laity, layman, couldn't hack it, could you? Some of us got it, some of us don't. And we created this categories, see, of here and here, like we were. And after all, the only reason you're around is to pay for me to do what I need to do. So shell out that money. And make me look good. And we've developed that concept. But see, the early church didn't have that concept. They had, hey, we were all somehow called of God. We were just Christians called of God, man. And everybody was a full-time Christian, a full-time minister of the gospel. Everybody was. Everybody had a call in their life, a thumb in their back. And when persecution hit Jerusalem, everybody said, oh, no. Hey, Herod's killing James. He killed James. Now he's after Peter. And the church at Jerusalem scattered like rats. They just went everywhere. Just went out of Jerusalem and went to all these foreign cities everywhere. And, of course, what did they do, man? They were all full-time, down-to-it, called of God missionaries. And everywhere they went, they planted churches. And everywhere they went, they poured their lives out. And everywhere they went, they saw themselves as full-time ministers. For instance, you'd go up to a guy and say, well, hey, I'm getting acquainted with you. And well, what do you do with yourself? And he would say, well, I hang around the grocery store. I own that grocery store downtown. But see, that's not my job. My vocation is I'm a minister of the gospel, and I support it by working at the grocery store. See, that was their concept. Not, well, I'm a meat cutter at the grocery store, and, I do teach a Sunday school class on Sunday morning, though. See, this is my deal, and I do that on the side. See, their idea was, this is my deal, and I do this on the side. And nobody worked for money. See, why do you work? Well, I'm not going down to that stinking job. Why? They don't pay me enough. Well, you don't work for money anyway. See, if you work for money, they never will pay you what you're worth. And somebody will always rip you off. And they'll never see your true value. So you don't work for money. Why do you work? Your work is a platform for the full-time ministry God has called you to. And God is so good, he gets some money on the side. See, that was their concept. That's what he's proposing in this parable. Which puts you right in the middle of it, because you're to be a helpless person filled with the resource of God, and you are the minister, you are the planter of the seed, he says in the parable. Which brings us where we want to be tonight. Initiation, instrument, inevitable. This means that it is inevitable that you are going to plant seed. This is an awesome thought. In fact, it's interesting. There's a contrast, of course, going on in the parable itself, or maybe it isn't a contrast as much as a parallel, and that is there is a parallel between, if you look at verse 37, he who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The enemy who sowed the tares is the devil, verse 38 or 39. So you've got a contrast going on between the Son of Man, a helpless man filled with the Spirit, and the enemy who is sowing tares. And you've got a parallel or maybe a contrast, depending on how you look at it, between those two. One thing that you see is compulsion. See, the Son of Man who's filled with the Spirit, the helpless man who's filled with the Spirit, who's the Son of Man, is absolutely driven by this compulsion. See, there's no necessity, there's no have to, there's no, well, I ought to, there's no, well, I feel guilty if I don't kind of stuff. There is an inward compulsion that burns in the bones of the helpless man who's filled with the Spirit that absolutely makes him, causes him, spills him out, forces him. He can't think in any other terms but the terms of, I'm a minister, I'm a full-time, I'm an evangelist, I want to, I can't help myself, I think this way, he says. Why, I'm a helpless man filled with the Spirit, and I've taken on the nature of God who is driving me, sourcing me in the planting of the seed. Now, the interesting thing and the parallel is, we saw that same thing going on with the Pharisees, who are filled with the enemy and all of their own self-centeredness. And just to remind you, let me walk you through a little bit of chapter 12 again. See, they came to the scene of the disciples picking grain on the Sabbath day. And of course, they are there with their finger, and they had finger stretchers. I think we're all out of those, aren't we? Yeah, I think you took them all. Anyhow, they're finger stretchers, because the longer the finger, the better off you are. And they were pointing the finger at the disciples for picking grain on the Sabbath day, and were about to stone them to death. And why are they doing that? What is their issue? And you might look at that scene and kind of push it aside and say, well, yeah, people do things that are upsetting, and you look at what they did and say, whoa, that wasn't very good. I wish they wouldn't do that kind of thing. But go on about your business. But not them. See, in the next scene, in Luke's gospel, he says they actually went and found a man with the withered hand and brought him to the synagogue because they knew the compassion that Jesus had. They knew the compulsion that was inside of him. And they knew that if they brought a man with a withered hand to Jesus, what would Jesus do? Well, he's going to heal him even if it is a Sabbath day. They knew that because they knew the compulsion of Jesus. And they did the whole thing to accuse him, which tells you they have a compulsion. See, they can't leave this alone. Why don't you just go home and take a nap, guys? No, they can't. Why don't you just let Jesus go out and heal the multitudes and do his thing and just no, we can't. We got to see. We can't. We got to plant the seed of evil. We have to plant the tares. We cannot. Why don't you just go? They went to their conference room and plotted murder. What are you doing? You've got enough to do, enough committee meetings. Your life is busy. You've got a schedule. You've got wife, kids. You've got temple to take care of. Just relax. And Jesus isn't hurting anybody. He's out in the countryside. He's not bothering you. In fact, he's lowering the welfare bill. So what do you care? Well, you see, they got something going on inside of them that's driving them. They cannot tolerate this. Just as Jesus could not tolerate a man with a withered hand, they could not tolerate Jesus healing a man on the Sabbath day with a withered hand, because both of them have this overwhelming, driving compulsion inside. I want to propose to you, you have that. One way or the other, you've got that. See, it is inevitable. You are either going to promote him and plant seeds of righteousness, or you are going to destroy and plant seeds of tares. You are either going to be involved in wheat planting, or you're going to be involved in tare planting. You don't have any choice on that. That is inevitable. See, the guy that takes an individualistic view of this and says, hey, it's my own personal business. What I do in the privacy of my home is my affair, nobody else's. I'm not hurting anybody. Yes, you are! Because you are planting tares. And it's growing in my community. And it's hurting my family. And it's affecting my kids. And it's affecting my church. and affects my neighbor. See, this is what you do in your home is my business, because it's not an isolated thing that doesn't. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It has long range, people. And the dad who says, well, I don't want to influence my kids. They can go to church if they want to, but I'm not going to influence them. What are you talking about? You are going to influence them. You're planting in their life. And the interesting thing is, you don't do that about school. You don't say, my kid wants to be educated, he can go to school if he wants to, but he doesn't have to. See, you don't say that. You don't say that about the ball team. That kid's going to play ball. Because there is this compulsion that is within. And this is not individualistic thing, and hey, I'm over in a corner, and it doesn't matter. It does matter, because you are either planting wheat or you are planting tares. Want to look at the field of your life? So involved in this inevitability is this idea that you don't have any choice, see? You are going to plant wheat or you're going to plant tares. You are contributing. And there's absolutely no way out of that. The second part of this inevitability is the consequences. See, you don't have any choice on whether there's going to be consequences or not. The only thing you and I have a choice on is, we have no choice on planting seed, wheat or tares, and we have no choice on the consequences of whether it's wheat or tares, but we have a choice on whether it's going to be wheat or tares. We have a choice on that. That's the only thing we have a choice on. You probably didn't get that. We don't have a choice on whether we're going to plant. We're going to do that. And we don't have a choice on whether there's going to be consequences on what we plant. We don't have any choice on that. The only thing we have a choice on is whether we are going to plant wheat or tares. We have a choice on that. I debated whether to give you this or not, but hey, guess it can't hurt anything. I heard something this morning that I just had to write to you. First, let me take you back 2 decades. I was at a youth outreach service. The speaker was Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Pritchard of the Salvation Army. He read a poem that I've never forgotten. It was penned, get this, it was penned by a young German college student. Young German college student. The poem was called Union with Christ. The entire poem was a cry to find this union. The words of the poem, oh, that I might find him, still haunt me today. Why do they haunt me? Because that young German college student that wrote the poem was Karl Marx, the founder of communism. Was there no college professor? Was there no fellow student who could have planted a seed, the wheat, in a young man's life who wanted truth? And the world could have been saved from communism. Years later, I was studying the life of Mohammed. I was trying to find out why there was a mixture of Jewish and Christian scriptures in the Quran. I came across this paragraph in my study. As a teen, Mohammed was eager to find truth. He spent much time on many visits to a monastery near his home. Although he was not allowed to converse with the monks, he observed their worship very closely. He saw only form and ritual, and he went away empty. Could there be some monks in eternity looking down on militant Islam with great regrets? Somebody planted seed. This morning on Christian radio, I heard this story. In the early days of this last century, the Lord was blessing the ministry of a preacher, Billy Sunday. Thousands flocked to hear him. His church was packed every Sunday. Across the road from the church was a small coffee shop. The owner had hired a foreign student to help serve tables. His English was poor. This greatly annoyed the customers. They were consistently rude to him. They tipped him poorly. And he responded with a hate for these Christians. And at the end of his studies, he went back to his homeland, China. And the boy became the tyrant Chairman Mao. Somebody planted seed. Dear Jesus, eternity is going to be a revelation of the seed we have planted. And Lord, I can't do anything about my past. But in the name of Jesus, I can do something. I have a choice. I have an involvement. Now. I didn't know to go into a coffee shop across from the church. Making fun of some young man from China. It's going to affect the whole world. I didn't know, God, that a young German student, I just passed him by. I didn't know. I should have wrapped my arm around his shoulder and talked to him about Jesus. I had my schedule. God, I just go down to my job. I just live my life. I just do my thing, God. And have you called me? Have you called me? And I come to you tonight in helplessness, laying at your feet, saying, God, would you fill me and make me a son of man who's the sower of the seed, the wheat, the good seed. And may I do absolutely nothing in my life, oh Jesus, but sow good seed. Night and day, day and night, every attitude, all the outspill of my life, all the reactions of my system, the thought process, the jokes I tell, the way I treat people. Make me a sower of the seed of righteousness in my world. And God, bring overwhelming forgiveness tonight when I've slept off, when I've just acted like it didn't matter, when I was so wrapped up in my circumstances that I forgot what I'm about. I lost the vision. People irritated me. Things didn't go like I thought they should. I became complacent. Forgive me. Forgive me. And let the compulsion of the Spirit of God burn in my bones. That the seed of the heart of Jesus might be planted in those around me. Heads are bowed. One of your options tonight is not, I'm not going to sow wheat and I'm not going to sow tares. I'm going to remove myself from that scene. You cannot. You are sowing, for you are a sower. Hey, would you let Him use you? I'm not giving you any other activities. I'm not giving you any other thing to do. I'm not adding to your list of things that you must accomplish. I'm not even telling you to pray more, read the Bible, start a Bible study. I'm not calling you to preach. I'm not. But friend, would you be helpless and let Him fill you? And would you let your life burn with the outspill of the seed of His presence that would affect your world? He's calling you. Moments of seeking. Be obedient.